All right, greetings. Hello, everyone. Great day to all. Thank you for joining me for another edition of the Inward Journey Home. I'm Adam Abraham, and this effort is sometimes hard to categorize because we are a society that's very category focused. We want to put things in boxes. We want to organize. We want to look at very specific things, and oftentimes we want to ignore all the things that are around it, all of the things that whatever we're focusing on connects to, and in so doing we don't really see the ramifications of what we do, of our actions and our efforts. And so this program is hard to categorize because I look at everything. I care about everything because everything is related to everything else. And I'm think in terms of my numbers, so to speak. Numbers are small, and that may be due to not a lot of reasons, because in fact the numbers could be very large, and I would imagine at some point they will be, even with me doing things the way I do. But it's hard to categorize because I will talk about science, I'll talk about philosophy, I'll talk about current events, politics, I'll talk about all these things. I will talk about agriculture because it's all important. And certainly I talk about medicine. And what is done in those areas affects everything else, meaning the quality of our life. It actually even means the state of our health. It means what we allow to be done, what we permit, and what we say no to. So if we're going to change things in our society, and I know there's a lot of people who want to change, but they don't know how, they don't know what to change, they don't know where to start to make the changes, and perhaps even more so, they don't know why. They may on some level know the change is needed, but they're not able or haven't prepared themselves, equipped themselves to articulate the why. So, all that being said, this episode is going to be an outcropping of the why, and it's going to talk about agriculture, growing, how our foods are prepared, the quality of them, or the lack thereof as it presently is, and what can be done about to change that. Because organic foods are great, homegrown are great. However, the vast overwhelming majority of the foods and food materials, I'll call them materials, that we consume are produced on very large tracts of land. There are about 2 million farms in the United States today. The average farm size is about 440 acres, the average. Now, there are many, many more that are smaller than that, but there is a significant number that are much larger, 1,000 and thousands of acres in size. Now, that's a good amount of activity, and preparing foods, one, with some level of quality in quantity, has been the challenge for farmers for quite some time. And what they've done is they have succeeded at producing quantity of food materials, but it has been at the expense of the quality of them, because the quality of foods have only one determinant, at least from where I sit, and that's whether it nourishes you or not. And for some time, I'm talking generations, I'm talking decades before most of you who are watching this came on this plane, including myself. So for a long time, the spectrum of nutritional value has diminished. It has narrowed. And right today, it's really, really low. And the fact of the matter is that the upturn in diseases of many types, while we can attribute them to such things as vaccines and have all the debates around that, and those conversations I know are warranted, there are other more basic, more fundamental factors that are being ignored, and that is the quality and the nutritional value of the foods that we ingest and intake every day. They contribute as much and as significantly to anything that any vaccine would ever do. And as we stay in this mindset of only stay in this track or that track, we tend not to look over here and over there and seeing, okay, how are these things being affected? And how can we do something better? So with all that said, today's today's program is really a pleasure, because this is the most that you'll hear from me. Well, no, you will hear from me, but it's my pleasure. I read a book a little while ago called Sea Energy Agriculture by Maynard Murray, who was an MD, and he performed a number of tests to confirm and establish that a full spectrum of minerals are necessary and certainly beneficial. He was an MD, so he knew human physiology, but he did this because food, again, nutritional value in food is really the issue. And he took steps and developed a way to put what he calls sea solids, and in essence, a full spectrum of minerals that had been condensed and made in solid form and applied to soils, so that those soils had all of the minerals that humans need. And let's see what happens. And the results were conclusive, consistent, that when the minerals were there, the nutrition was there, the productivity of the plants were there, etc. Well, the gentleman we're about to talk to is Arthur Zeigler, the author of Seawater Concentrate for Abundant Agriculture. And the product that he developed, which is called Sea Crop, is an outcrop. An outcropping is a byproduct. It is derived from the inspiration of Maynard Murray. And not only that, it's an improvement. Where Dr. Murray would put a ton or more of sea solids on soil, Arthur Zeigler has put together a product that in a gallon, a jug of which can be mixed with 100 gallons of water. In other words, you can get and put and apply the same amount of material with a far, far less source material. So we're going to talk, instead of me rambling on, it's my pleasure to introduce Arthur Zeigler. Let's just begin with that. Let's talk about what sea crop is and what's the basis and why it's important.
Well, seawater contains every naturally occurring element on Earth. Given enough time, everything ends up in the ocean. Every trace mineral, every ultra trace mineral, it's there. We take seawater, we remove 95% of the sodium chloride and concentrate the other constituents about 30-fold. They don't all concentrate at the same rate, but approximately 30 times the level at which they occur in seawater. In addition, seawater, a cubic foot of seawater contains more microbial life than a cubic foot of good topsoil. That concentrates as well. And in addition, there are organic chemicals. Fulvic acid, for example. All seawater everywhere on Earth contains some fulvic acid. Not a lot, but it's there. And this is both of marine origin and heterogeneous origin that washes out from rivers all over the planet. Fulvic acid is a highly complex material. It contains over 50,000 different organic substances. There's probably not anyone on Earth that fully understands what all's there. This fulvic acid consists of organic compounds that originally were hormones, vitamins, DNA, and this weathers these long chain organic molecules as they are altered through weathering will condense up. They will shrivel up to where they're presenting more of a spherical shape. There's less surface area where further weathering can take place, and then they persist in nature in that form for a very long time. In addition to that, there's DMSP, dimethyl sulfonyl-propionate, which is a mucopolysaccharide that plankton, phytoplankton, coat themselves with for osmotic control to keep sodium chloride from inundating their cells and preventing them from functioning properly. This sloughs off in enormous quantities worldwide. It's present near coastal areas where you have the upwelling currents out of the ocean trenches against the continental shelf, and where you have the abundance of plankton. This is a real interesting material. When it breaks down, part of what it breaks down into is DMSO, which
dimethyl sulfoxide.
Yes, which many of us have used as liniment. I use it myself. Another thing it breaks down to is dimethyl sulfide gas. It's a gas, goes up into the atmosphere. And here where we live next to the ocean, it causes 85 inches of rainfall a year because it seeps the clouds. And then on the other side of the Cascade Range here, we have a desert, semi-desert for the same reason.
Right.
So it alters planetary weather. So that gets concentrated as well. So it's not just a mineral concentrate, it also has viable beneficial microbes and other organic materials. Early on, I did an experiment that proved that the effects that we see on plants from using this as a fertilizing material, it's not just due to the trace and the ultra-trace minerals. I can take our product, the Seawater Concentrate, put it in an oven at about 400 or 500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is high enough temperature to burn off the organic carbon and any of the organic chemicals. But it won't affect the inorganic chemicals. It won't drive off any water of crystallization or change them in any way. We end up with a a white powder, an ash, and we can reconstitute that back to its original level of water content. And when we apply that to plants at the same rate that we normally use, it no longer has a significant effect.
Really? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Which shows that it's, even though we're producing a mineral concentrate, trace mineral concentrate, it is the trace and ultra-trace minerals working together with the organic content that is responsible for the effect that we see on plant life and animal life as well.
Sure. This material, we so often think in terms of the minerals or the microbes, but this water has just everything. So it seems here.
Seawater is an extremely complex material. It is a stew. And consequently, the concentrate that we make from it is a highly complex material. To the extent we can't point to any one thing and say this is why it works. So all of our research has been guided by its effect on plant life, which we can quantify. We can measure that. But as far as what the mechanisms are, there are so many different ways it could be causing an effect that we can't point to any particular one and say this is the reason. We've got we have this broad buffet of mineral cations that can be selected from for enzyme formation. Enzymes are critically important. Every cell on a plant has from 1,000 to 2,000 enzymes that are responsible for, they catalyze every biological operation that takes place in a plant. And they need the mineral cations. Every enzyme has a metallic atom at its reaction center. For example, cobalamin, vitamin B12, has that one atom of cobalt in the reaction center. If you don't have that, vitamin B12 can't be made. Vitamin B12 is critical for microbial life and for life in plants and in animals and humans as well.
Well, and what you're saying is so key, because we have cultivated a habit of taking and thinking of our foods, for example, from the standpoint of how it looks, as opposed to what's in it that actually helps drive and support, the quality of life itself. And it turns out, even as reading your book, you've shown a direct relationship with the gradual and steady reduction in the presence of the various spectra of elements and stuff in our soils or in our foods, but also a gradual and steady increase in various disease pathologies.
I'm sure you've probably seen some of the pictures of vegetables that the pioneers grew when they were breaking virgin ground. Unbelievable. Some the size of some of the vegetables. Virgin ground contains everything that was put in the good earth. It doesn't take very many crops before some of the trace and ultra-trace minerals are expended. They're the first things to go. And the approach we're using is to borrow those back from the ocean, put them back on the land again, and more nearly approach what the virgin soils were at one time. Making the trace and ultra-trace metallic cations available for enzyme formation. That's part of it. That's one aspect of what we're trying to do. And it's true. If the plants can't be growing well in worn-out soils. Where do we get our nutrition from?
or do we get it? And the question is, do we? We don't.
Yeah, and if we don't, is this responsible for the deterioration of health that has been well documented by government agencies over the last few decades? The tremendous increase in diabetes, in obesity, in heart disease, in cancer. If you compare that graph against the declining nutritive quality of food grown in our worn-out agricultural soils, it looks like a one-to-one correlation.
Now, the interesting thing is we would often attribute this decline to, it's depletion, we've worn things out. But it would also infer that there was an absence of available, like a scarcity, like it's worn out and it can't be replenished. There's no shortage of available source matter of seawater, if I'm correct. We're not in a scarcity situation there, are we?
Seawater covers almost 3/4 of the surface of the planet.
Okay, all right.
Unless people live close to the ocean, they look around and they see land. They don't realize just how vast the oceans are, and that there's far more ocean surface on this planet than there is soil.
So what you're saying is what we're basically experiencing is the consequence of simply not replenishing the components and constituents that the soil and that life needs, which is available if we just did that.
That's part of it. The other part is soils contain, in many cases, most of the minerals that we need, but they're locked in the rock particles. Now these will weather out. That's how soil is created. You get enough freezing and thawing in the wintertime and other weathering factors. That's geological weathering. And to the degree that happens every year, that's your annual increment of increased fertility. But it's very, very slow. It's glacially slow. That can be speeded up by microbial activity. If we can increase the microbial activity and the microbial population, then we get biological weathering of these soil particles, liberating minerals. And by applying the trace and the ultra-trace minerals and the other growth factors that are in the seawater concentrate, we measurably increase microbial populations, both bacterial and fungal, in a very short period of time. We can measure the difference. And they do the heavy lifting. We just initiate the process.
All right. What I want to do is I'm going to cut here for a second. We're talking with Arthur Zeigler. What we're going to do is we're going to reposition just for a little bit to make certain you're comfortable and not so contrasty with our son. And then I want to ask about the ramifications of our use of various types of products to kill off microbes, such as pesticides and herbicides, and relative to what you've just said. So I'm going to cut. Now we'll shift. I'll be right back. We're talking with Arthur Zeigler. He's the author of Seawater Concentrate for Abundant Agriculture. Needless to say, abundant agriculture is one of our mutual goals and intentions and interests here and objectives. And before we took a little break, we're now nice and comfortable again. And but the practice in standard agriculture, something that I'm really interested in doing is creating and providing and presenting a way that regular farmers, the average farm today in terms of acreage is 400 some odd acres. And needless to say, there are many farms that are way much larger than that. A whole bunch of real estate is being managed, or maybe some might say mismanaged. But nonetheless, I want to give farmers a reasonable, practical way that they can shift from the way they're doing things, which are not abundant. They're not producing. They may produce a bunch of abundant stuff, but there's very little nourishment in it. And what I'm hearing, what you say, and before we broke, I was talking about the practice of killing a lot of the microbes as a function of standard agricultural practice. But ultimately, the source material, and we're going to talk specifically about your product, there's no shortage of it.
No, there is no shortage of it. Seawater is extremely abundant.
Okay. So is it that you have a really convoluted way of doing what you do that makes it still hard to get material? Let's say someone with 1,000 acres or 10,000 acres, can you produce?
We can produce. It's just a matter of public awareness. There's no shortage of it. It's simply a matter of the public becoming aware and even knowing that we exist.
Mm-hmm. And caring.
And caring.
Yeah.
But there are reasons to do it. There are progressive farmers who use our material and are very happy with the results, not only from a standpoint of increased nutrition, but economics. Mm-hmm. We have a customer in the state of Illinois, nice young man, progressive. He and his cousin farmed 10,000 acres together. He has spent 3 years transitioning from commercial agriculture through the use of cover crops, compost tea, sea crop, and last year was their first year of no commercial inputs. They did use just a little bit of nitrogen. I think it was about 26 pounds to the acre. Mm-hmm. They saved $156 per acre in inputs. This all went to the bottom line. Mm-hmm. They had, now these are commodity farmers, mm-hmm. corn and soybeans. Mm-hmm. Some of the corn they grow goes to ethanol mm-hmm. production rather than food. Some goes to animal feed, fortunately, because mm-hmm.
It's the technical type of corn.
Good quality corn should not be going for ethanol. Mm-hmm. They had last year their best bean production ever. They had their second best corn year ever. Mm-hmm. So there is an alternative mm-hmm. to the treadmill that most farmers are on that wastes their soil.
It wastes their soils, but it also bankrupts the farmers in so many different ways, or drives them. They tend to be. It's almost like they're being held hostage in such a way because they're dealing with the various diseases. They're dealing with so many different villains, and anyone who has what appears to be some type of plausible solution often is going to find that solution is scarce and expensive, and that's even before they discover upon getting it that it really is ineffective. That's been the result or the effect of a lot of farmers that I've at least talked to or heard from. I love the fact that there is plenty, so there's not a point of plenty. What we're apparently missing is, again, awareness. and an appreciation that this is actually something that is doable. The seawater just holds so many different, not only different, I want to say dimensions, of what's effective, so to speak. Like I said, so we got the minerals, we got the microbes, we got so many different, and water too, for that matter.
Yeah, it does. The soil's monocropping creates the conditions for so many pathogens to thrive in. That's one of the big sources of the problems, why farmers have to use so many fungicides and insecticides and herbicides. But monocropping is a necessary condition for efficient agriculture. Very hard to avoid the situation. What has done even more damage than monocropping is the trying to do everything with just a few chemicals. NPK. NPK. The emphasis has been on that for almost 2 centuries. And that is, you can force crops out of soil with NPK, but at the expense of depletion of the other minerals and of the organic content in the soil and the microbial life. And what you end up with is relatively sterile soil that is really, farmers many times are engaged in nothing more than outdoor hydroponics. The soil is nothing more than something for the plants to clutch to keep from falling over. And that is why our food no longer has the nutrition it once did. I had a conversation with a feedlot operator not too long ago. He told me he's having a hard time getting animals to put weight on now with the feed that's available to him. The corn, the soybean meal. The nutrient content is so lacking. And confined animals, they have to eat what they're given or they perish. You see those 3 eagles flying up there?
Oh, yeah. Wow. Well, sorry you guys missed that, but it was nice.
We saw 7 out in the field the other day. Mating season.
Oh gosh, they're having fun. The testosterone is running here. Good. Okay. Wow. One thing I noticed related that you, in your book, in fact, you showed consistently, not only our crops showed it consistently, not only additional significant increases in productivity, but they also showed those increases, generally speaking, increases from the next year to the next year. It wasn't just that it was a big, it was like the following year there was even more gains, so to speak.
There is a cumulative effect, and that is that's from the buildup of the microbial content in the soil, and again, as we mentioned, as we were talking earlier, they speed up the biological weathering of the rock particles in the soil, making more nutrition available for plants. Have a customer over in the eastern part of this state, in the Spokane area, dryland wheat farmer. And he has 1,000 acres of wheat that he alternates with garbanzo beans. And this man, born and raised on this ground, he knows the ground. And in 5 years' time of using Sea Crop, it's completely changed the tilth of his soil. He said that it used to be after they combined the wheat, the ground would be so hard that they could hardly get a tool into it to cultivate it for planting the next year's crop. He said now when they combine it leaves tire tracks. The ground is loosened up that much. Nothing else was done. Now, you know, there's no way that the minerals we're putting on do that. The microbes do the heavy lifting. We stimulate the microbial activity, the microbes make the change.
Yeah, and they're not union. I mean, you know, they work. They love what they're doing.
24/7.
Absolutely.
They don't charge overtime.
Exactly. Or look with the right. You know, I want double time for those. So, this is going to be my second season of having closer contact with the growing process and the cycles, and ours is with a 10,000 square foot garden. Okay, but it was fun to watch the bugs do their thing. You know, we grew zucchini, for example, and we had these big folds of leaves and the canopy, and it's a zucchini forest we made, you know. But it's like we go and we look, and we had some that were pretty good size, like a 16-inch zucchinis and stuff like that. But it was so fun to look in and see what was growing, and then the bees. The bees, yeah, they just move right out, get right by you, go in and do their thing, and then move right out. You know, they tolerate our existence there, you know, and they just work right around us. It's all okay. They just do their thing, and they're there at the crack of dawn. They're on the work, on the clock or not. It's really fascinating to watch, and this is happening above the ground, but it's also happening below the ground.
Yeah, below the ground, and that's the key. And agriculture hasn't focused on that until only the last couple of decades, because it was out of sight, out of mind. Everyone was measuring what's above the ground, what's visible, what's harvested. But in fact, it's what's going on out of sight in the rhizosphere, the root ball of the plant. That's the key to everything. Anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 of all the products of photosynthesis that are made by the plant in the leaves, in the foliage during the day, are exuded out through the plant at night.
Exudates, you call it, right?
Yes. During the day, we have transpiration. We have with heat, with the leaves intercepting photons and heat being created, we get water coming up through the plant and evaporated out through the leaves. We have everything's moving up from the roots. We've got minerals coming up and water and photosynthesis taking place in the leaves. Well, when the sun goes down and that all stops, these fluids go the other way, and they go out through the roots, and you have carbohydrates that have been generated in the plant through photosynthesis that go out through the roots and feed the microbes that live there. And then the microbes proliferate, and they have a very short lifespan. When they die, each one of those microbes becomes a little package of fertilizer that feeds the plant. And the more of this that you can encourage, why the healthier the plant is. And that's another point. Healthy plants don't get sick. Healthy plants don't attract insects. We've seen a huge reduction in insect predation, insect pressure plants, fields that have been treated with sea crop.
Yeah, that is also something there are. We have the sense that that disease is something to be fought in and of itself, as opposed to health is something to be created and maintained in and of itself, through balance, through establishing that environment that allows the plant to do the things that it basically needs to do. One of the things I wanted to ask, there are a couple situations. One, for example, I know some farmers in the eastern part of the state, for example, who are dealing with one, chronically and habitually high pH in their soil, but in addition, in conjunction with that, compacted soil. And so let's talk about how sea crop would help. You've kind of begun that, but let's talk more specifically to that situation.
Well, compacted soil is due to a lack of organic material.
It's essentially they're either dead or they're anesthetized.
Yeah, well, you get a collapse of soil structure.
Yeah.
The bacteria and some fungi create organic chemicals that glue tiny soil particles together into larger particles, agglomerations of little particles making larger particles, and this looser structure allows air to penetrate. Plants need oxygen in their rhizosphere. It allows air to penetrate. It allows water to penetrate. It allows a much greater water holding capacity. We have had reports from farmers that in drought conditions, their fields were great and their neighbors were just burned out due to the greater water holding capacity of the soils, and then the fact that we generally see a larger root structure in plants treated with sea crop, to where they can gather nutrients and moisture from a larger feeding area. But yes, introducing the organic material back into the soil, either through compost tea, or increased microbial populations, or all of the above, preferably, and cover crops too, of course. That will change the tilth of the soil and bring it back to life again.
Another condition, and it's interesting to think about relative to pH in soil and using a seawater-based input amendment, and that is soil that is already, you might say, high in salt. I've was asked about this recently, where a farmer with orchards, he's got trees, and he's in a situation where the salinity is already, the salt content of his soil is high, salt content in the water is high, and he's seeing something's got to give here. How or in what way does sea crop or adding all of what's there affect something like a high salinity state?
Well, as I mentioned, we do remove 95% of the sodium chloride and concentrate the other minerals.
But then, let's say the salts are high in the soil already.
Well, sea crop will increase the plant's ability to be healthy in a high salinity situation. Did some experimentation a few years back with wheat, and growing the wheat in different concentrations of sodium chloride watering with different concentrations of sodium chloride, and comparing that to an untreated control being watered with the same saline waters. Mm-hmm. And sea crop definitely does help the plant thrive in saline waters. However, you know, if you add enough salt, it does have an effect.
Absolutely.
Now, I've had the question asked a number of times, what about the salt in sea crop? Because there is some there. Mm-hmm. Runs about 1%. Well, 1% for each gallon of sea crop that's put out there, we're talking about roughly 10 grams of sodium chloride mm-hmm. per gallon of sea crop. So we're talking, if you put on 4 gallons to the acre for the year, for the season, we're talking 40 grams, an ounce and a third mm-hmm. of sodium chloride. Now, if you're an organic farmer and you're using manure can run 50 to 100 pounds of sodium chloride to the ton, and it's not unusual to recommend 10 tons to the acre. Mm-hmm. You could be putting 500 pounds of sodium chloride to the acre out there by using manure as a good organic farmer. So the amount of salt that we're contributing with sea crop is infinitesimal in comparison.
I think so. You know, the other thing, and I'll just say it, because you are also including microbes, you know, part of the work that microbes do, I think, is transformative, is transmutational. They have an ability to transmute or to cause certain types of changes in the effects, so to speak. I mean, in the sense, let's talk about sodium or high salt content. It's like when you put in, you get all the other life there. It appears as though you start seeing where a plant can handle the. You know, I mean, if we're still putting down whole large amounts of it, you still can overwhelm anything. You know, a tidal wave it's still going to be more water than you can handle at the moment. You know, but I think in general, when we're talking about creating a new environment, and we're creating an environment that has a greater spectrum, because as we've talked about, they've been focusing on NPK for the most part. I mean, a lot of people know better now, but still the focus and the practices have been centered around NPK, and that's to the, that's leaving out a whole lot. But then that's just the mineral part. Then there's also the microbial and the enzymatic and these other parts that are all pieces of that puzzle that tend not to be thought about in these areas that we're talking about in conventional farming.
Yeah. The settling in the United States, the monocropping that took place of tobacco, cotton, corn, it was easy, the land was available, you wore it out in a generation or less.
And moved on.
You got in the covered wagon, you went west. Mm-hmm. Nice virgin ground. You didn't worry about using cover crops in the winter. So the topsoil eroded away, mm-hmm. or got worn out of all the trace and ultra-trace minerals, became infertile. You get in the wagon and go west. Well, finally, there wasn't any west to go to. Mm-hmm. You know, the population hit the Pacific coast. Something else had to be done. Fertility dropped off. NPK came to the rescue. Mm-hmm. And it produced results. You could put it on, you get a nice crop out of what would otherwise earlier have been worn out soil. Mm-hmm. And that worked for a couple couple of generations. And now there's major, major problems with that, as many people are becoming aware of. In the crops themselves, the nutritive value of the food being produced, and in general health of the population.
There are, and we talked about salt, talked about pH, and the general effects there. In the eastern part of and the southeastern part of the country is our citrus industry, one that has been racked with a number of different things. Certainly in Florida, from time to time, we hear of freezes that occur that devastate many, many acres of land, some of which have yet to be recovered from. And then there's another condition that has been associated with the citrus industry, referred to as citrus greening. And I have always contended that the reasons for it are different than are normally being said, but I would like to me, give an idea of how restoring and using this type of seawater might help mitigate conditions like that.
Now, I've got a couple of interesting citrus stories. One in Florida, and this is on grapefruit. And this was 8 years ago or more. Farmer contacted me. He had 3 groves with citrus blight, for which there is no cure. When you get heavily infested with citrus blight to a certain degree, it's time to bring in the dozers, tear everything out, burn it, and replant. This guy was losing 50% of his crop on the ground. 50% of the grapefruits were falling off and wasted. So he wanted to try seed crop, and he used foliar sprays monthly at 1% strength. And that year went from 50% drop to 20%. Tremendous improvement in 1 year. And we were really looking forward to see what happened the second year, but the man who owned the groves that he was leasing sold the groves. And that was the end of our test.
Oh boy, okay.
But we had, now we'll address citrus greening. The state of California is so afraid of citrus greening that they have mandated that these trees be, in any commercial orchard, that they be treated with antibiotics. And they have to be constantly treated with antibiotics to prevent an infestation of citrus greening. One of my distributors has this last season been involved in treating a block of commercial oranges down by the Salton Sea thermal area. They were losing a lot of fruit dropping, not because of any infestation, but because of the antibiotic is damaging the health of the tree. Well, they took one block, which again is treated with the antibiotic, but it was also given seed crop. They didn't lose any fruit to the ground. $3,000 per acre to the bottom line because of the improved harvest. I hope to have the pictures in the testimonial next week on this.
All right, we're going to have that. You got to give them the video here. This is going to be good. These are the things I have been. We were talking earlier about you attending the World Ag Expo this past year. I have, which is in Tulare, California, every year in February. And I have been down there, so I've seen that, and I've also been at the Ag Expo here in Washington in Spokane. I had a booth there a few years ago, and my general feeling and sense is that these methods are just still foreign to so many farmers today. And that's part of what we want to begin at least change. I love the fact, you talk about how the farmers have gone from, or the settlers, they go, virgin soil, they get all this good, okay, they burn it up, or use it up rather, then move on. We come along seeing that this soil is desolate, and or whoever the next one is, and they just simply think, well, it's desolate, and that's the way it's going to be. We tend to have this, I want to call it baby duck syndrome. Whatever you see is the first thing you see is mother, okay, and you don't know that something that is maybe fallow now that can be changed back, even in large amounts, even large tracts, and actually, oftentimes, it's going to be at far less cost and expense than a person would be thinking is going to be required.
Yeah. All it takes is the will to do it and the effort.
Yeah. And so these are things, that was really so cool. Now, I was hinting at the possibility of also freeze tolerance, because I see the microbes, the life under the soil, that activity, including water and the environment under the soil, as maybe, let us say, the lack thereof is what actually brings the susceptibility of freezing.
I have a story for that.
Okay.
I have a customer down in the Medford, Oregon area that has a large greenhouse, tomatoes. And he called me and told me that his tomatoes, which had been treated with seed crop, had frozen twice and come back each time and continued producing tomatoes. Something that would, normally be season over death.
Yes, I have heard farmers say that that was the kiss of death, essentially. Yes.
Yeah, and I had another similar story from another greenhouse operation in the Columbia Basin. So plants are capable of producing their own antifreeze to a degree. Again, tidal wave, anything can be overwhelmed. But yeah, I've heard that story a couple of times from customers with tomatoes that have been seed crop treated, that they can freeze and come back and produce.
In your book, you point out the fact that the plant is literally capable of producing hundreds of thousands of chemical compounds. Why would it not be able to? And I've read this in a number of different places, of apple trees, for example, growing in Siberia and being fertile and I mean through a Siberian winter. If that is the potential, the ability, then our issue simply is just how do we do this, not whether it can be done.
Right, exactly.
This is great to know. The one other thing, because I anticipate that we'll do this on an kind of ongoing basis. I don't want to pull everything I can think about your mind right now, and I'm enjoying the conversation. And this is the type of information, as I see it, we really need to be letting people know. We are in a mindset typically that whatever our problems are right now are really unsolvable, generally speaking, especially if quote-unquote scientists haven't told us of a way, and we're not looking ourselves. But you mentioned another thing in your book. You talked about goners, And let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, okay. Our distributor for the European Union is Hack Agrofeed. Baron Hack is the gentleman operating that company. His family's been in the animal feed industry for 3 generations, and that's his orientation. So he's done a lot of experimenting with animals, broiler chicks, dairy cattle, beef cattle. And he wanted to do this one test with veal calves. Veal is very big in Europe, much in demand. So he decided to do a test. He gathered veal calves from different countries because apparently different areas have different disease problems, different parts of Europe. So he gathered together, I believe, as I recall, it was 40 veal calves. And then they decided to include in the test 10 sickly calves. They called them goners, because once they're identified as a goner, they invariably die.
They're as good as gone, yeah.
And they have these great big feed mixers. They're like a big cement truck type drum, rotating drum. They'll put in hay and grains and so forth. And they sprayed the sea crop on the feed as it was being mixed. So everyone got the same feed ration, except the control didn't have the sea crop on their feed. Finished out the sea crop treated cattle. Excuse me. The sea crop treated cattle had about an 8% additional weight gain, if I recall properly, over
Yes.
the control. Their T cell count went way up, measurably, way up, just in the first couple of days. And in addition, the goners all finished out at the same weight and just as healthy as all the rest. They didn't perish. On the whole, the test was considered to be a failure because the meat, instead of being gray, like Europeans expect their veal to be, was red, and they couldn't market it as veal.
Oh, darn. Wow. Now, that was probably an opportunity for even a new higher quality type of food, but then there's habits again. There's that baby duck syndrome all over again. It shows up everywhere.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, these are the things that this is how we change things. We need to kind of bring them up with a fresh outlook, and perhaps also equipped with some different types of understandings and underpinnings. Because otherwise, we're generally not going to question our experience, generally speaking, especially when someone that we have become accustomed to listening to, or something that we've become accustomed to, some ways of thinking, are still sitting there, and maybe these same people or same sources are still telling us the same thing. This is the thing I have sometimes with books. Once the words are written, they can't rewrite themselves. So we have to basically start taking some stock. Well, what do we know now? What have we learned, and what can we apply? And that's probably one of the other things that I really love about this, as I have learned more about carbon in the form of a biochar. And the fact that it tends to need to be married, if you will, or combined with something before you start to actually use it. You need to actually put it with something to charge it, to inoculate, to fill it up. This looks like a perfect product to actually be as a way to make what I'm calling now ready to spread carbon products as in the form of biochar. And so I had been looking at another natural product, which is the Zeigler yucca. We talked about this a little bit, but from what I see now and an understanding, this is a much better solution.
I think you'll be happy with what you see if you do some trials with it. Gary Klein at Black Lake Organic in Olympia. I don't know if you know Gary.
I saw him last night.
Gary, when I first published my book in 2012, Gary asked me to come up to Black Lake Organic and give a talk. And he showed me at that time a test that he had done with sea crop on peppers. There was the untreated control. There was his special potting mix that he had put together. There was sea crop. There was sea crop with biochar. Mm-hmm. The control was heavily insect damage. Mm-hmm. His special potting soil had peppers. They looked pretty good, but there was a lot of insect damage. Mm-hmm. The sea crop by itself, lots of peppers, good healthy looking plant, tiny amount of insect damage. Mm-hmm. The sea crop and biochar had about the same amount of peppers. They both looked really good. There was no insect damage on the sea crop plus biochar. So I think you'll be happy when you try it.
Okay. Well, I think if I'm happy with it, that means we're going to be happy. But that means the user, the customer, the consumer, and all. It's fascinating when you add these pieces and put them together. It tends to be that when they are helpful, and you add them together, it tends to multiply the benefit. It even tends to accelerate the benefit. It's fascinating how that tends to work when they are we woefulized. I want to get woeful in it. I don't work to get his word in there again. But it's a good thing. We multiply the benefit. And so doing this, I've seen, of course, where people, and I know over the last 10 years or so that people have begun talking about it and studying carbon and biochar. This is just such a wonderful resource and solution, and in the same way, the material, the source of materials, are not in short supply. You are concerned, if anything, is the process, the way, and you have applied that in, because for example, Dr. Murray's, his sea solids, he was putting tons of material on per acre, so to speak, thousands of pounds. And now here, the sea crop is highly concentrated, and so comparatively speaking, you're using a lot less source material. If I'm understanding this right.
A lot less, yes.
Okay. So in that regard, and then same type of situation with the with carbon, many variable factors, but when you come to a place where you've got all certain things under control and you got a process, I think we put these two together. It's something that can actually be a predictable benefit for someone, and that's what we're looking for.
Yes.
Well, I tell you, I could talk more, and I enjoy, and I do anticipate that we'll do more. I think what we are talking about really needs to be heard on some kind of regular basis, that people know that they have options, know that there are not only solutions, they are available in abundance, actually, and truth not nearly as much as we think it's going to necessarily cost. Having spent some time on some farms in Florida, for example, and seen what they are using, like to control pH. And it's not just in Florida, so I'm not pointing them out, but sulfuric acid to control pH, and they're using what the D224 or this. They're spraying stuff in the air. They're spraying stuff on the ground. They're spraying stuff here and there. They need to wear masks to actually be in a field. And how can that even be presumed to be healthy? What we didn't talk about is like cotton. And cotton as a percentage of the acreage that is used to grow cotton, it is overrepresented in the percentage of chemicals that are put on it. You're talking 3% of the acreage, 12% of the chemicals being put on cotton. Excuse me. This is what's normal these days. It has become normal. Even if you want organic cotton, which is, I'll say, even a little better, even that's not given what the word organic means, but it's only 1% of the available cotton in all of this country. I mean, this is where we are.
So many of the chemicals, agricultural chemicals that are applied, the insecticides, the fungicides, the herbicides, they're antibiotics. Mm-hmm. How can you have healthy microbial life in the soil if you're constantly applying antibiotics? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It can't happen.
Yeah, we have brought the idea of good bug, bad bug, and we've taken it to and worked it up to a religious fervor. Yes. And we don't understand that bugs are neither good or bad. Life isn't good or bad in this respect. Bugs respond to the environment that they're in, and the ones that we consider bad are the ones that simply survived what we had put on.
Well stated. Well stated.
So I'm going to suggest, anyway, we're going to look forward to talking again, meeting again, and like I said, we're only down the road, but I have certainly enjoyed meeting you and enjoyed the conversation, and I'm always happy and looking forward to learn and share more. So Arthur Zeigler, thank you so much. The website for the Sea Crop product is sea-crop.com. And you can also get his book, Seawater Concentrate for Abundant Agriculture. I think that's a good place to start, because you can see we haven't even really only scratched the surface of all of the actual experience and demonstrations that you've done it, and it's even here in the book in many ways. So I want to thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I'll say right now, I enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you did too. But we only scratched the surface. It's a good start, but we only scratched the surface. The subject of transition of conventional agriculture into a more nutrient-rich, to producing nutrient-rich foods as a normal course of their activity is really what we're talking about. Because the normal course of activity today in agriculture, in conventional agriculture, is for a subpar product that may look good for a while, but it doesn't nourish, frankly, or hardly at all. And I'm just going to say genetic modification and that approach doesn't change those things. There are also factors of environmental efficiency and impact that are never discussed in that subject. But the first and foremost thing is, again, we've talked enough for now. It's my desire and intent to continue and come back and bring Mr. Zeigler again and again. I enjoyed talking to him, and again, even in reading his book, there are subjects we didn't even begin to talk about, to show the difference between having full spectrum of nutrients on the soil and what happens as a result, and the quality of the crops that are produced thereby, and the benefit of those crops to all who consume them. This is really a good thing for everyone, and we need to become aware of. And the other beautiful thing that we did establish is that there's no shortage of this. For all of the 2 million farms, there is no shortage of the availability of this material that they can use as an input. This isn't the only input that's available that's helpful, but this one is available. It's demonstrated to be very helpful, and it's not in short supply, it's in abundant supply. The only thing that's missing is awareness, which we're doing something about. So for more information, first of all, the book is Seawater Concentrate for Abundant Agriculture. And this is abundant growing. You could say for healthy crops, for healthy people and animals. Anyway, that's part of it. And also the product is called Sea Crop. And it's available at sea-crop.com. And likely you're going to find it also in other places such as presidentwater.com. We will begin to, and are beginning to, make such products available because they are options for our vortex generators. They are complementary to them. And just so you know, there are other tools that are natural that are also available that we are continuing to discover and loving the heck out of it. So with that, thank you, Arthur, and I'll be talking to you again soon. Thank you, viewer, for hanging in there. Well, hanging in there. If you're interested, if this has made sense, you are here. So thank you for your interest. And until next time, this is Adam Abraham when I bring you another edition of The Inward Journey Home. Peace, be well, and I love you all.